Right, okay, good afternoon, used car salesmen and people that aren't going to hell. My name's Danny, this is my own worst enemy, mental health podcast. Firstly, I think I should take a moment to apologise for dragging my feet this past couple of weeks. You're about to find out why. Been a bit of a stressful one. But anyway, I'm going to make it up to you. Going to be released in the next 2 or 3 episodes. I'm going to be releasing in quick succession, so like every couple of days, just to try and catch up with myself. So yeah, look out for them. Also, I'm sat recording in my car today. Currently on holiday again with a family in Wales, and I've got no editing software to hand or anything. So it's just going to be sort of raw recording and then just upload it. So apologies in advance if this episode doesn't sound very polished. What else? Okay, so yeah, before we jump in, bit of housekeeping. So I hate to keep banging on about this whole YouTube demonetization thing, but it's kind of come to a head now. So just quickly, for anyone that doesn't know, YouTube recently decided to demonetize all the channels that have got less than 1,000 subscribers, basically, which includes us. And I've been mithering you guys for like the past couple of weeks to subscribe, because the money that I make from the YouTube channel helps pay for the web hosting and all that kind of thing. And yeah, well, YouTube gave us till the 20th of February to hit the 1,000 subscribers mark, and we did pretty well. We got something like 200 extra subscribers in the past month, but we didn't quite make it. So I think we're around about the 750 mark. So still 250 subscribers short. And what is it? It's 22nd today. So yeah, as of Wednesday, YouTube will have demonetized the channel, and so they'll no longer be paying me for my content. And yeah, I can't keep harping on about it every bleeding episode. Like, I feel like a internet panhandler trying to get people to subscribe. But yeah, so I'm just gonna have to sort of take it on the chin and get over it. But it's looking like it's probably going to be another couple of months now until we're sort of eligible to apply for monetization again. So I'm in the process now of like downgrading the website to a different hosting provider, try and save a bit of money. And yeah, I don't really know what I'm doing, if I'm honest. So the website might disappear for a few days, it might not. But at the very least, the show notes for the next couple of episodes, they're not going to be available until next week at the earliest. I don't know how long it's going to take me to shift over. I might break the old bleeding thing for all I know. So knowing my luck at the moment, that's definitely what's going to happen. And yeah, well, here we go. Speaking of which, yeah, bad luck and money problems, right? If getting shafted by YouTube wasn't a big enough kick in the bollocks, get this, yeah? So regular listeners or long-time listeners might remember last time I was on holiday, went to, where was it now, Tenby or something, South Wales. That was a complete disaster. Yeah, I had hospital visits, had dodgy neighbours playing horrendous music all night, was in a bad location next to a motorway, family arguments, drama, me and Leanne falling out, all that malarkey. Well, it's happened all over again, yeah? Only this time, we hadn't even bleeding got there. It happened all before we set off. So get this for a bad week. So last Wednesday, or Wednesday before last now, Valentine's Day, right, me and Leanne, we forked out a load of money to get like a load of sex toys in, yeah? Not that that's anything new, right? We've already got like an entire drawer full under the bed, but it's all a bit like knackered and dusty now, or these bits missing and stuff. And like for instance, so we had like a pair of vibrating nipple clamps, yeah? One's just mysteriously disappeared. Not sure how that happens. Maybe it sort of span off mid-coitus and landed down the back of the telly, but yeah, I keep worrying that my little boy's going to find it and then come running into the living room one day with it clipped to his nose or something. You know what kids are like. But the point is, one nipple clamp, pointless. Got this other sort of this vibrating knobbly thing as well. It takes them rubbish little tiny sort of watch batteries that look like little pills. Useless. They last about 5 minutes, right? And then you never use it again, because who's got batteries like that lying around? Rubbish. Anyway, so we get all this stuff delivered, and like the day before Valentine's Day, we discover, well, one of the outfits doesn't fit. Yeah, it's like, you ever seen these things, these like viral pictures that go around the internet and on Facebook and Twitter nowadays, where it's like someone orders a dress off the internet from China, and the difference between what it looks like in like the catalogue and what it actually looks like in real life. It's one of them. It looked ridiculous, right? Looked sexy as hell in the picture, looked pathetic in person, right? And it wasn't Leanne's fault. It was definitely the outfit. And so that was knackered. And what else? Oh yeah, one of the main sex toys we bought was bust as well. I won't share what that was. And then on Valentine's Day itself, right? So Leanne bought a load of fancy food in, so we could have like a nice meal at home together instead of, paying over the odds at some packed restaurant where it's full of couples ignoring each other, staring at the bleeding iPhones. And what happens? I come down with a stomach bug again, second one this year, right? So no food, no sex toys, no shagging, worst Valentine's Day ever. Then next day after Valentine's Day, Thursday, I wake up with vertigo, right? Not to be confused with a fear of heights. That's acrophobia, right? Never mind what Alfred Hitchcock tells you. And vertigo is extreme dizziness, right? And I seem to get little spells of this from time to time. Anyway, so the car's been acting a bit ropey, and we're booked to go on holiday on the Friday. So I take it to get it sorted, right? And I'm dizzy, right? I've got no other way of getting it to the garage, so I'm driving at like 10 miles per hour because the world's spinning. And then I had to walk like 2 miles home in the rain, right? With my head spinning like I've drunk 12 pints of whiskey. And spend the day in bed, which basically feels like lying on a bleeding merry-go-round for 6 hours non-stop. The garage rings, yeah? I'm expecting, I don't know, a couple of £100 at the most. I wish. Car's knackered. It's going to cost like upwards of £700 or something, and that's just for the parts. Doesn't include labour. So basically it's more to fix the car than the car's actually worth. So it's like, oh, forget it. I need to buy a new car now. But I've got no money. Of course I haven't. Need to get a credit card. Lovely way to start 2018. £2,000 worth of debt. So anyway, start scouring the internet. See this car that looks nice, but it's sort of up in Oldham, which is a few miles away from us. So I have to get my mum to drive me there like a bleeding teenager. Get there, give it a test drive. It's fine, whatever. But it's the sticker price, £2,000 on the nose. Which basically is just going to wipe the credit card out in one go. But it's like, whatever. Can't be being too cheap about it. I've got 2 kids and, I need something fairly modern, fairly safe and sturdy and all that. So shake hands with the guy, right? Send me mum off home because they assume I'm going to be driving back in this new car. Anyway, when we go in the office, right, guy starts adding all these extra fees like VAT and sales commission, credit card fee. By the time he's finished piss farting about with his little calculator, 2,700 nicker he's asking for. No chance, right? So I obviously see my ass with it. It's obvious I'm not happy with this, right? And I can't pay him anyway. I haven't got it. So he does his stupid little car salesman thing where he sort of goes in the back and probably speaks to the wall, pretending he's talking to someone, goes and speaks to the manager, so he says, comes back, he's magically got it down to 2,500, right? How nice of him. Yeah, no, not interested. Again, I haven't got the extra £500. Can't help him. And then he sits there on his calculator anyway, doing all these sort of fake calculations. Suddenly he says he can do it for 2,300, but that's bottom line. He says, can't go any less than that. And then, right, cheeky bastard, he starts pissing and moaning about it. He's sat there at his computer mumbling. He's like, I was going to earn £150 commission on this, and now I'm not going to earn nothing. And it's like, don't say that out loud, knobhead, right? I don't care, right? All you're telling me there, right, is you wanted me to pay you £150 because I saw a car on your website, I travelled down, I decided I wanted it without any assistance from you, and you want me to give you £150 for the privilege? Well, tough shit, yeah? Here's a tip, knobhead. Yeah, don't advertise cars for £2,000 and then add commission afterwards. Advertise them for 2,150 and take your commission out of that. If you don't like your job, piss off and go get a new one. Sick of it. Anyway, so I sacked that off, and because I was expecting to drive home in this new car, now I'm freezing my ass off in the middle of nowhere. I don't really know where I am. Looking for a bus stop, I can't find one. And it's no use asking my mum to come back and pick me up because I directed her there in the first place. I'm bleeding starve to death before she finds me again. So £30 in a taxi just to get home, and I still haven't got a car, and I'm supposed to be going on holiday tomorrow. So anyway, Next day, go out, try and find a new car again. And it's something like, by now, I've got like, we're supposed to be going in the afternoon, so I've got like 6 hours to find a car. And, oh yeah, and another thing, that the twat from the garage yesterday, right, sends me a text saying he's managed to get all the fees down now to a flat £2,000. So if I still want the deal, I can come back and get it. Cheeky bastards. Tries having my eyes out for 700 quid and then expects me to still do a deal with him. Swear, you used car salesmen want feeding to bleeding crocodiles. Sick of you. Anyway, so yeah, I'm off. I find a new car on the internet and it looks fine or whatever. So I go off to have a look at this new one. And the woman at the garage I usually go to, it's a really good garage and they take care of me and stuff and give me decent prices and that. And she gives me some tips on buying a car, and she's saying, she's like, switch the car on, use your intuition with sound and stuff, anything that doesn't like quite sound right. Make sure they haven't warmed the car up before you've got there. So like when you get there, press the bonnet, make sure it's still cool and that, so you're like starting it up from cold. Make sure there's no lights on the dashboard. She's like, if there's any lights on the dashboard, sack it off. It doesn't matter if they say it's a minor fault or the light will go out or it's the light that's faulty. She says, if there's a light on the dashboard, sack it off. So I go check this car out. I do all that. I follow all her tips and stuff. Car looks fine. Take it for a test drive. Feels fine. Yeah. Managed to even wangle the guy down a few £100, try and like save a bit of money. And gotta say, got a bit of revenge because I part X'd the old shitter, my old Mondeo that's no use anymore. I sort of pawned that off on him, and there's a list of like 12 things wrong with it. Like say it needed like 700 quid's worth of repairs. I just said the MOT had expired and I couldn't be bothered taking it in. I just fancied something new. So I tried to sort of offload this rusty old piece of shit on him. And so I'm lying as well now, you can't beat him, join him and all that. Anyway, so this new car, it's a nice car, big estate car, whatever. It's got like leather heated seats. It's an automatic, got cruise control. Feels like a tank and it's like drives nice and smooth as well. And so yeah, I buy it anyway. And yeah, by the time I've like sorted out tax and insurance and all that and all the like the admin and stuff, it's too late to go on holiday now. I've been running around all day. I'm too tired to drive, so we have to postpone the holiday until the day after. So losing a day on the holiday. So that's more money down the drain. Right, day after, finally set off on the holiday. Right, we're about an hour away from home, 2 hours away from our destination. Car breaks down on the motorway, right? I've got 2 kids and 2 dogs in the car. It's freezing out there as well, right? So it's either sit in the car and risk having some sweaty pisshead in a juggernaut smashing into us while he's swigging Skull Super and watching animal porn on his iPad, right? Or stand outside and freeze to death with an 11-month-old baby while we're waiting for the recovery guys to come and pick us up. So anyway, we get picked up, we go to a garage, right? We stood outside freezing for about an hour while they're trying to figure out what's wrong with the car. Finally figure it out, yeah? Not only is it going to cost nearly 400 quid to fix, yeah, but they can't get the part till Monday. So that's 3 days of the holiday down the pisser now, right? And these twats have got me over a barrel, right? The car's immobilised. I can't take it anyway. I get a second opinion. I can't say no. I've got no choice but to leave the car with them to fix it. And we have to ask Leanne's dad to come and pick us up and take us all the way back up to Manchester. So, right, we spend the weekend at Leanne's parents', right? Monday morning, 2 days later, the guy from the garage rings. Again, I'm expecting, just he's got the part, he's stuck it on or whatever, come and get the car. Yeah, no chance. It's not a thing wrong with it. It's not 1 or 2 things wrong. It's fucked, right? The car's a complete and utter shitter. The guy says it'll cost something in the region of like 3 to 4 grand to fix it. Yeah, he says it's not worth it. It's not roadworthy. Get rid of it. So I ring up the garage that sold me the car. Yeah, say, wankers, you've had my eyes out, right? So I'm not letting you get away with this. I'm going to go to a solicitor, all this. I'm going to take this to the nth degree if I have to. I'm getting my money back. He must have taken me seriously because he's like, all right, fine, calm down. We'll get the car back to me and I'll give you a refund. But because the car's like 100 miles away, it's undrivable. Now I have to pay 200 quid to get it towed back to Manchester, right? So now if we're ever going to go on this bleeding holiday, I have to rent a car. That's another 200 quid, right? But there's a catch, yeah? We can't take the dogs in a rental car because apparently it might give people allergies or something like that. So the dogs were supposed to be coming on holiday with us. We paid extra for the dogs to come on holiday, right? And now they can't come. More money wasted. Finally, set off on a Monday afternoon, right? Can't just head straight for the holiday home. We've got to nip to the garage to pick up a load of luggage that we had to leave behind, and to obviously pay them for not fixing the car. That was another 50 quid. Finally, set off towards the holiday. I have to pull over. My son starts puking all over the place because he's travel sick. Then we get stuck in a shitload of rush hour traffic, so that a 3-hour journey turns into a 6-hour journey, right? The final 2 of which, my 11-month-old daughter, right, she's going mental, screaming down my ear the entire time, because it turns out that, unlike most babies, she doesn't sleep in cars. She turns into one of them bleeding zombies from 28 Days Later. But yeah, anyway, I'm here now, finally. Got 2 days left, paid for 7, brilliant. Right, need to calm down. I've got it off my chest now. I actually feel a bit better now. I've been able to sort of piss and moan about it. Right, so anyway, what's today's episode all about? Okay, so calm down. Okay, so ever since I started this podcast, I get quite a lot of people contacting me by email, sort of like asking me questions and seeking advice and stuff like that. And I always try to answer every email I get. If it's off a listener, I do get a lot of emails off, like, you know, people trying to sell shit and advertisers, and mostly it's like agents trying to promote, get their like pseudo-sciencey nobodies to be a guest on the podcast and stuff like that. I get loads of that. And I don't really answer that stuff, but if it's a listener getting in contact, I try and respond to everybody. But there's a couple of kinds of questions that I'm not really comfortable answering. One is sort of anything to do with medication, you know, because I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't pretend to be one, you know, I'm not qualified in that area. And I'm not qualified by experience either. You know, I've never actually taken any medication. Not because, like, I'm against it per se or anything. It's just not my thing. You know, I'm one of these people that sort of, medication for me is sort of a last resort. And I'm also a bit paranoid about all, like, the side effects of it and stuff like that. So I've just not got any experience in it. And yeah, the second thing I'm not comfortable answering is anything that sort of falls outside the bounds of my personal experience. Like, you know, I get people asking for advice about things like, you know, bipolar or eating disorders and OCD, and I don't have any experience with those things personally, so I don't feel at liberty to sort of make any recommendations other than to, you know, look for a therapist, or, you know, maybe there's like some books that I know of that are supposed to be good or whatever. And another thing I'm not really comfortable doing is sort of telling people what they should do. You know, sort of like lecturing from the pulpit of recovery. Instead, what I prefer to do is sort of frame it like, look, here's what I did, you know, here's my perspective, here's what worked for me, and maybe it could work for you too. Or another like response I kind of utilise is to sort of pass on information that I've learned from other people, because, you know, as well as doing this like podcast and stuff like that, for a few years there, it was like my entire reading list consisted of nothing but like psychology, depression, anxiety, CBT, what have you. So I've got plenty of sort of second-hand knowledge and advice and like source material that I can direct people towards by way of, you know, all these bleeding books that I've read over the years. So yeah, anyway, all those caveats aside, when I do answer people's emails, it's quite common that you know, like a week later or whatever, people will sort of email me back and say, thank you, because, you know, something I've said's like, I don't know, it's inspired them, or it's like given them comfort, or helped them clarify their own thoughts, or like given them a new way of looking at the situation or whatever. And so I've started to think that instead of confining these dialogues to my inbox, where I can literally only help one person at a time, a way of sort of scaling this aspect of my role as a mental health advocate, even though I'm not really like a fan of that term, is by taking all these emails that I receive, strip away the personal aspects that sort of make them unique to individual circumstance, which is also a way of like protecting people's identity, I suppose. And then sort of distilling them down to like the more general underlying concerns. So, like, for example, the autobiographical episode I did, which was episode 32 off the top of my head, talked about all kinds of things in that episode. But the thing that seemed to hit home the most was when I was talking about my insecurities about being a father, and specifically, I kind of felt that my failures in my career made me inadequate or feel inadequate as a father. And the response to that particular aspect of that episode was probably the biggest response I've seen to any episode I've ever done. You had a lot of guys like sharing their own stories, and a few of them sort of asking for advice on how to deal with their own insecurities. And the thing is, like, you know, each of these guys that's reaching out to me, they've all got like a completely different set of circumstances to one another. You know, maybe they've got one kid, one guy's got 5 kids, some are married, divorced, some are, you know, like young guys with little babies, some are older guys with older kids, some have got girls, some have got boys, some have got both. And so, okay, say for instance, let me give you an example of the kind of thing I might receive. Not a real person, but like a composite of a real example, say. So, say you've got James from New York, right? He's got a 7-year-old daughter, Amy, who he only gets to see every Saturday because, I don't know, his relationship with his ex-wife isn't very good. And let's say he lives in a neighbourhood where there isn't much entertainment for children, and he's struggling with like agoraphobia and panic attacks and stuff, and you know, he can't go on public transport, so he can't go too far from home. And, you know, maybe it's gotten so bad that he's had to quit his job. But now he's freaking out because his ex-wife has just sort of got herself a new boyfriend, and like some guy who's like, he's got a great job and he's earning lots of money. So, you know, maybe this new guy's able to take James's ex-wife and his daughter out on all these lavish excursions. And, so he's worried that his daughter's not going to want to see him anymore. Maybe she'll stop loving him and start preferring this new guy. I get emails like that. And with something so personal, there's too many variables there for it to be sort of relatable enough for my listeners to make it worth broadcasting, if that makes sense. What I can do, though, is sort of answer the broader underlying concern, which in, a case like that, it's something like, how do you maximise the time you spend with your children when you're struggling with anxiety and you've got limited time and resources at your disposal? That's something that, not only will it help like James from New York specifically, but it's universal enough that it can apply to and help a lot of other people as well. So yeah, bearing all this in mind, I've decided to start doing a series of Ask Me Anything episodes, AMA episodes, which, it's sort of a way for me to answer people's questions that serves everybody. It's the best use of my time, and it's the best use of your questions as well. And so yeah, I'm going to aim for doing maybe one a month, about an hour, 90 minutes per episode, something like that. And also worth mentioning is I don't just want to do stuff that's sort of purely mental health related. I want to sort of chuck some fun stuff in there as well, because it's not just mental health questions I get in my emails. I get asked all kinds of things off you guys. And again, mainly after the autobiographical episode, when obviously I confessed to all these kind of bizarre adventures in my early 20s, like working in a brothel and being my former life as a member of the Communist Party and all that kind of thing. So I get questions off people like, why did you become a communist? And why did you turn your back on communism? What's your opinion on Donald Trump? What's the weirdest thing you ever saw back when you was working in the brothels in Manchester? Who's the strangest person you ever met? What's the most embarrassing thing that ever happened to you? And I even get questions like, like me and Leanne have been together nearly 12 years, and sometimes people ask me like, how do you keep the romance going? And all kinds of stuff comes in. What's my opinion on bondage as a therapy tool as well? That's a question I've had. So yeah, so I'm going to be covering all kinds of stuff, and anything goes, basically. I'm pretty much an open book. I'm thinking I'm going to go for something like a ratio of 50% helpful and 50% just pissing about and having a laugh, I think. Because let's face it, we do talk about quite a lot of maudlin stuff on this podcast, so I think a bit of light relief would make a nice addition to the proceedings. However, there is going to be a catch. And the catch is that I've decided to make these Ask Me Anything episodes available exclusively to people supporting the podcast, which I know some people might find disappointing, but here's the thing. So this thing that happened with YouTube it's bigger than just the short-term inconvenience of me being out of pocket. It sort of made me realise that these third-party services that I depend on can just pull the rug from under me at any moment. It's like a constant threat of being arbitrarily bankrupted without warning. So think about it like this, right? So this podcast is still like relatively small, yeah? Imagine I'd built this podcast up to like, I don't know, say 1 million subscribers, yeah? I've got all this ad revenue coming in off YouTube, so I'm able to sort of invest a certain amount of money in, you know, improving it, making it a bit more professional, making things like run a bit smoother. And I don't know, maybe I've got a sound engineer and an editor. Maybe I've got like an assistant booking the guests for me. Maybe I've rented studio space. Maybe I've got like a camera guy in to help me do the video podcast for YouTube. And I've basically, you know, I've got to the point where I've sort of built this infrastructure around me that the podcast is now reliant upon. And then, yeah, one day YouTube comes along, decides to ban me because, I don't know, maybe they've like changed the policy on discussions around sensitive topics like depression and suicide or whatever. And just like that, like the entire operation collapses overnight, gone. Yeah, and there's nothing I can do about it. And I don't like that. I don't feel secure. And I need to make this project self-sustainable. And it just sort of feels foolish to trust and rely on revenue streams from third-party services that can just sort of bankrupt me in an instant. And so, yeah, this decision, it's more than just like a way for me to line my pockets, if that's what anyone thinks I'm doing, because believe me, I'm a long way off this resembling anything which even remotely resembles a profitable business. Quite the contrary. But I'll just like the idea of building a community of people that's independent and self-sustaining, where none of these twats from Silicon Valley can just come along and tell us what the fuck we have to do, or like the way we have to behave, or what we can and can't talk about, and where we can just do what we want, and everyone else can just sort of kiss our collective arse, basically. So anyway, today's episode is just going to be a little taster of what's to come. I'm going to give you a bit of a feel for what these episodes are going to be like. And if you enjoy it, you'd like to hear more of these episodes, all you need to do is go to myownworstenemy.org/support. It's myownworstenemy.org/support and sign up for a monthly subscription for just £2 a month. There are other options available. You know, if you can afford to pay a bit more, you'd like to pay a bit more, completely up to you. But any monthly subscription option will get you access. If you already have a monthly subscription, by the way, don't worry, you are already on the mailing list. You won't get left behind. And anyway, the way it works is when I've done an episode, everyone that's on the subscription mailing list, I'll send you guys an email, and there'll be a link in there which takes you to a private invitation-only page where you can play the audio file and listen to the episode. And also, worth mentioning is it's not just going to be these Ask Me Anything episodes which are going to be available. This is just the beginning. Moving forward, I'm going to be creating all kinds of different content for subscribers, because I don't just want this subscription option to be like one quirky little bonus episode that you get every month. I want it to be like a whole package of content that really makes a difference to people. But don't worry, if you can't afford to support the podcast this way, that's fine. The interviews, the stuff we've been doing for like the past year and a half since the beginning, the Maui you've come to know and love, that's always going to be free. But for those of you who are sort of nearest and dearest to the podcast, I think this is a way for us to sort of start taking this little project to the next level. So again, myownworstenemy.org/support, and the first exclusive episode will be available in March. And that's about it. Right, okay, so today, what I've decided to do today, again, just to give you a feel for what one of these episodes might sound like, is I've decided to subject myself to the same quickfire questions that I subject my guests to at the end of every episode. I was going to do this at the end of episode 32, but considering I'd already sort of rambled on for 2 hours straight, I thought it'd probably best give it a miss. So, we're going to do it today instead. So, once again, as I always say, please enjoy my conversation with me. Right, okay, question 1. Do you have any book recommendations? And, well, the way I word it in the interviews is, do you have any book recommendations either on this topic or anything else you feel would be of value to the listeners? So, let's stay on point. Let's assume that the topic is mental health. My book recommendations. Okay, so I've got quite a few, and probably going to be a long answer this one, so get ready. Okay, so let's imagine if we reworded this question as, if you could only recommend one book, what would it be? The answer to that question would be Feeling Good by David Burns. I think it's called Feeling Good, the New Mood Therapy. And David D. Burns. That book is that's like the gold standard of CBT, self-help, basically. Now, the title is cheesy as fuck, and it sounds like a one of them sort of annoying, fluffy self-help type books from the 80s, but it's really not. I think the title was just a way of selling books, but the content is fucking hardcore. It's like it's the real deal. David is the real deal, and off the top of my head, it's a big ass book. It's like 700 pages or something. You get like a history of the research into depression. There's loads of techniques and exercises in there. There's a bunch of lifestyle advice, ways to sort of like prevent yourself from becoming like susceptible to developing depression. Things like overcoming perfectionism, working too much, approval seeking, dealing with stress, all that kind of thing. There's a chapter on suicide prevention as well, which is obviously important. There's a chapter as well which sort of making the distinction between sadness and depression. I think that's quite an important aspect as well. And also it's got a brilliant section at the back of the book which sort of goes into detail about the whole chemical imbalance theory. And I think in later editions as well, or the edition I've got, there's something at the very back. It's called something like The Consumer's Guide to Antidepressant Medication or something like that. But again, that goes into like real specific detail about all like the different medication types that are available, like how they mix and interact with other medications and stuff. Again, really, really sort of handy for people that are like new to this, that are feeling depressed for the first time. Maybe they're going seeing the doctor soon. That last chapter alone is worth the price of the book, just because it's a way for you to make an informed decision about whether or not you're going to take medication, and if you do, what kind of medication might be most helpful for you. But yeah, it's the real deal, that book. Again, it's something like 700 pages. It's a massive book, and it's just packed with stuff. If you're just going to buy one book to get you started with CBT, it'd be Feeling Good by David Burns. That'd be my top recommendation. Oh, as well, I'll throw this one in. If it's Feeling Good is very much sort of depression focused. If you're dealing with anxiety, that's the thing you're battling against. David's got another book called When Panic Attacks. It's very similar to Feeling Good, but it basically revolves around anxiety instead. And it doesn't have the medication section at the back of that one, unfortunately. I can't remember if the medication section in Feeling Good includes anti-anxiety medication. I'm not sure, maybe it does. You'll have to check that out. But yeah, so that'd be my number one recommendation. Second recommendation would be a book called Mind Over Mood by it's Greenberger and Podesky. I can't remember the first names. I think it's fair to say if there was going to be a contender for the heavyweight title of the gold standard CBT book, this would be it. Firstly, the focus is more general in this book, like it covers depression, anxiety, anger, guilt, shame, like a broad range of things. And it sort of feels more practical than Feeling Good. It's not necessarily more practical. Feeling Good is a proactive, practical book, but I don't know. There's a real emphasis on it in Mind Over Mood. Like, it's packed with worksheets and exercises and stuff. And I think the best way to put it would be that Feeling Good is like a counsellor, and Mind Over Mood is more like a coach. So I guess it depends which approach sort of appeals to you more. What else? Okay, so yeah, having learned what I've learned since my own battles with all this bullshit, one recommendation I always make to people nowadays is to include some ACT in your repertoire. ACT, Acceptance and Commitment Therapy, ACT. CBT is great, yeah, but it has its shortcomings, and I think two of which are sort of directly addressed by ACT. And those are, firstly, CBT can sometimes be a bit too proactive. And what I mean by that is, this is something my therapist Robin Bailey taught me, is if you sort of imagine your thoughts are like a tennis ball machine. Though, you know those tennis ball machines that sort of, they fire the tennis balls at the tennis players to help them practice the return serve or whatever. If you imagine your thoughts are like one of those, when you fall into depression or anxiety, it's like the machine gets ramped up, and then you're just sort of stood there getting hit by the tennis balls. So you sort of naturally start trying to sort of duck and weave all these negative thoughts that are being thrown at you. But all the ducking and the weaving and the getting hit by the tennis ball is fucking exhausting. So what CBT teaches you to do is it's sort of like, it teaches you to pick up a tennis racket and defend yourself by sort of deflecting the balls away from you and sort of smacking them back. But it tends to neglect the second option, which is to just step out of the way and watch the tennis balls from the sidelines. Like, the thoughts are still going to come, but you don't have to get so involved in the process. And that's sort of the acceptance part of ACT, which is sort of very much in line with the whole mindfulness concept. The other thing that CBT tends to neglect is sort of how to refocus or repurpose your life during recovery. So, like the biggest problems with like depression, anxiety, whatever, is sometimes some people anyway, it becomes like your whole identity. Like every waking hour becomes devoted to either doing it or fighting it, and quite often it's sort of to the exclusion of everything else. So yeah, when you finally start to try overcoming these things, it sort of tends to create a vacuum, because it's all well and good to stop engaging in like destructive thoughts and behaviours or whatever. Like, take drinking for instance, yeah. It's not just a case of putting the bottle down, because say, what do you do with those 4 hours a night that you used to spend drinking? And I think CBT sort of tends to address that by saying that you have to find a more constructive way to fill your time, which is fine, it's true, but ACT sort of puts a real emphasis on that, and it says, no, you can't just sort of half-ass this. If you try and sort of fill your time with something arbitrary, it's not going to stick. You need to spend the time doing something that you actually, like, you truly value to give you the leverage. But, oftentimes when you ask people, what do they value? They haven't got a fucking clue. Some people don't know what they value. Some people don't even know what it means to value something, or what the difference is between valuing something and just enjoying it. And I think ACT sort of really helps you get to the bottom of that, helps you sort of figure out what your values are and how to utilise your time better, really. And the other thing with CBT is it's very much about sort of getting rid of anxiety or getting rid of depression, whereas ACT is about sort of living in spite of those things, which, on the face of it might not sound a very attractive prospect, because you might think, hang on a minute, I don't just want to accept my depression and get on with my life. But ironically, that's precisely the thing that's going to help you get out of the hole you're in. There's a quote by Bill Wilson, co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. One of my listeners, sort of Mark, reminded me of this recently, and it's you can't think your way to right action, but you can act your way to right thinking. And yeah, that's very much one of the fundamental tenets of ACT, that sort of makes it stand apart from CBT, I think. Another thing I'll add, you often hear discussion around ACT and CBT as one versus the other, especially among academics, which is most effective. And my thing is, and I've said this before, fuck all that, right? You don't have to think of this as either or like they do. We can think of it like a buffet. Learn about both approaches and then just pick and choose whatever works for you. It's like when you break your leg, right? And I say this as somebody who isn't a fan of the whole depression is like a broken leg analogy, because it isn't. But let's say you break your leg. When you go to hospital, it's not like the doctors are going to go, well, you can have morphine for the pain, or we could put a cast on it to help it heal, but you can't have both. They collaborate, they attack it from all sides, whereas I don't see or feel the same approach coming from psychotherapy. There's so much partisanship, and everyone's got their own little theories, and they're all so precious about them. And my advice for that is just let the ivory tower folks sort of wave the little dicks at each other, and don't ally yourself to anybody but yourself. Your loyalty should be to you, and what works for you, end of. Anyway, so my recommendations for getting started with ACT would be either, the first book it's called Get Out of Your Mind and Into Your Life, and that's by Stephen Hayes. Stephen Hayes is the founder of ACT, and it's basically, that book's like the feeling good of ACT. Genuinely brilliant piece of work, and it's by the guy who came up with and developed this approach. So, this is the guy who sort of knows it best. If you want something a bit more user-friendly, there's a book called The Happiness Trap by Russ Harris. That's probably your best bet. Stephen Hayes is the founder of ACT, but I think it's fair to say that Russ Harris has probably done the most to sort of popularise it and bring it to the masses. And it's likely due to his style of writing, which is it's just super accessible, really, really easy to read and digest. Okay, a few more. Going to sort of throw these out quickly now. If you're interested in mindfulness and meditation, all that kind of thing, I have to recommend The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. It's the book title is super cheesy. It's called The Power of Now, A Guide to Spiritual Enlightenment, which for me is a load of bollocks. And Eckhart Tolle, he's quite cheesy, and there's a lot of stuff in this book which sort of falls into the category of sort of complete and utter woo-woo shite for me. However, can't throw the baby out with the bathwater, right? The bits in it that are good, about the bits that are like a practical guide for sort of learning to live in the present moment and what that actually means, and learning to let go and not trying to control things so much. Those bits of the book are fucking masterwork. For me, I mean, I've read loads of books on meditation. I read books before this book. I've read books after this book. And I just don't think any book has sort of hammered home the concept of mindfulness quite like this one. So yeah, definitely recommend that one. If you like a good recovery story with a bit of practical advice thrown in, a book called At Last Alive by Paul David. That's like a personal account of this guy's struggles with pretty severe anxiety, and the main lesson in the book is he spends all his time basically sort of railing against this anxiety that he's struggling with for years, and eventually he has a revelatory moment when he goes to see his doctor, and his doctor says to him, basically, you're not going to get better until you stop trying to get better. And then he sort of realises that his entire life, every waking moment, has begun to revolve around anxiety and feeling anxious and being anxious and how to get rid of anxiety. And he's basically just become, his entire being is wrapped up in it. And this book is sort of how he learns to sort of systematically unravel that. He brought out another updated version, I think, called At Last Alive and Beyond, I think it's called. I've not read that one, but it's got equally good reviews on Amazon, so might be best to check that one out, because I think that's the updated version. For people who struggle with panic attacks, there's a book called Dare by Barry McDonough. McDonagh or Barry McDonough or something like that. I can't pronounce the surname. That again, brilliant book. It's not just about panic attacks. It's actually about learning to take like a counterintuitive approach to anxiety by sort of stepping into it and inviting more of it. But I think it works especially well for panic, because panic disorder is all about like the fear of fear and, like the constant fear of the next panic attack. And this book sort of tackles that problem head on. And I think one of the reasons I enjoyed this book was because I'm the type of person who, like, say when I go to the gym or whatever, I'm not one of those people. I don't want encouragement to make me lift heavier. I don't want someone standing there going, oh, come on, Danny, mate, you can do it. I need someone like calling me a pussy, saying, wow, bitch, you ain't got no chance to pick that weight up. You ain't got it in you. Because that just sort of, being challenged like that just sort of motivates me and fuels me. And this book sort of reminded me of that a little. That's not the tone of the book at all. It's not like one of those sort of cheesy drill sergeant self-help books like, come on, bitch. It's just, I think, just the philosophy behind it, that sort of face your fears, like, willfully go down into the belly of the beast. I think that approach might appeal to people who have got a more sort of combative approach to getting shit done. I really enjoyed that one. I have to give as well a token mention to a book called it's called Hope and Help for Your Nerves by Claire Weeks. Now, if you've not heard of Claire Weeks before, Claire Weeks is a bad motherfucker, right? And let me tell you for why. So this book is old school, okay? This book was published back in 1963. Now, these so-called like third wave therapies like ACT and like mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, that all the ones that like started in the 80s that incorporate things like mindfulness and acceptance and metacognition. Claire Weeks was writing about all this stuff 25 years before anybody else, right? And I don't just mean touching on things in a vague sense, like how, bleeding Nostradamus supposedly predicted 9/11, or how, in the Quran, they supposedly preempted the Big Bang Theory because like there's a vague passage in there talking about the heavens expanding. Not a vague sense like that. I mean for real. Like Claire Weeks was absolutely nailing techniques and ideas that would sort of, later become known as like mindfulness and acceptance and that kind of thing. What's funny is I remember reading Claire Weeks quite early on in my journey, and pretty much every one of these books that I've just mentioned, when I came to read them later on, I'm going through them like, hang on a minute, Claire Weeks said that, and that's Claire Weeks' idea, and hang on a minute, that's just Claire Weeks reworded. Here's the thing though, even though she was definitely onto some of these ideas quite early on, things like ACT and MBCT have definitely sort of expanded on and improved what she was doing. So I'm not saying that everything is all just a Claire Weeks ripoff, because it isn't, and I'm also not saying that I recommend her books over these other ones, because I probably wouldn't. However, like I was just saying then with the Dare book and how that might appeal to a certain personality type, and I know it's not the PC thing to say nowadays when it's it's getting to the point that to even dare posit the idea that there might possibly be any sort of psychological difference between men and women whatsoever makes you a sexist, bigoted, chauvinist or whatever. But I think Claire Weeks might be particularly helpful for women. Like her writing style, her use of language, it's got a very feminine quality about it. She's a very emotive writer. There's a very sort of like a nurturing, motherly quality to her writing. A very different experience than like reading modern self-help books. And anyway, I think my claim is sort of backed up pretty well by the reviews on Amazon, if you want to go check them out, where there's loads of women in the review section saying that, they feel that Claire Weeks just gets it in a way that nobody else does. And, they've tried other books before, but this one is like a game changer for them. Probably also worth mentioning that she struggled with like anxiety and panic attacks herself. So yeah, she really had like skin in the game as well, so to speak. Right. So there's a bunch of book recommendations, big deal, right? Because I remember I used to recommend these books to people at the support group that I used to run. And when I did, I'd get one of two responses. The first would be people would just sort of glaze over the other reaction would be that they would go out and buy the book, and then I'd ask them about it a couple of weeks later, and they'd say they haven't read it, or they'd say it didn't work. So let me just, if I don't tackle this, if I don't mention this after the book recommendations, I won't feel like I've done this section, this question, any justice. So, okay, firstly, bibliotherapy, as it's called, which is, self-help, it works for a start, okay? There's loads of studies out there showing that it works. One particularly interesting is a study from 1995 by a guy called Rick Mars, but he did a meta-analysis. So where he takes all these studies which study the effectiveness of bibliotherapy and then compared them. So I'll just read you the abstract from it. So bibliotherapy treatments were compared to control groups and therapist-administered treatments. The mean estimated effect size of the 70 samples analysed was plus 0.565. There was no significant differences between the effects of bibliotherapy and therapist-administered treatments. Okay, so people did just as well on self-help books as they did going seeing a therapist. As well as no significant erosion of the effect sizes at follow-up. So usually they follow the studies up 6 months later to see how well people are doing, and people are still doing just as well 6 months later off self-help books as they are from seeing a therapist. Bibliotherapy did appear more effective for certain problem types, like anxiety and sexual dysfunction, than for others. Weight loss, impulse control and studying problems. Overall, the amount of therapist contact during bibliotherapy did not seem to relate to effectiveness, but there was evidence that certain problem types, including weight loss and anxiety reduction, responded better with increased therapist contact. There's a few others, like meta-analyses of these that were just specialising in depression and things, and they all show the same thing, and that is that bibliotherapy works. Now, I don't know the methodology used in all these studies, and I don't think the studies themselves would be able to sort of track how dedicated participants were to sticking to the programme. They can't follow people around at home 24 hours a day. But I'd hazard a guess that if everyone stuck religiously to the exercises and like the schedule that's recommended in these books, I reckon the outcome scores would be even higher. Because obviously, this is sort of the average outcome has to include the people that were maybe like a bit lazy and not very dedicated, which sort of brings the overall score down, if that makes sense. And yeah, I want to sort of address some of those things here now, because otherwise I'll feel like I haven't done this question justice. So the first problem with books, why people don't take books seriously, is they're too cheap for a start. You can't appreciate that someone has spent their entire career making all these discoveries, trial and error, like millions of pounds worth of research. Then they sit down 3 years spent writing this book, and then they package it all up and they give it to you for £5. Yeah, you buy a book at that price, which is it's like the same price as a fucking double latte at Starbucks. Yeah, it's a disposable price point, and so that's why I think people treat books as disposable. They don't trust them, and I just think it's like, you suffered so much with depression or anxiety, you've suffered so much for so long, it's taken so much of your life away from you, that you can't bring yourself to believe that all it might take is the words in a £5 book to help you get rid of it. And and I appreciate that. It doesn't sound a realistic prospect. But I just think it's like, I don't know, if these books were priced at £100 each and they were all on like a limited run of 10,000 copies, people are taken more seriously. And I think this is why a lot of people get suckered into spending like hundreds of pounds on these like special online courses for depression and anxiety, because they become convinced that there's some sort of hidden secret that they're not privy to, and that, yeah, by paying this £100, this £200 or whatever, that's going to get them access to this little known secret. And let me tell you something, there isn't a fucking little known secret, right? All these fancy courses, online courses and stuff, the elements that work in them are just stuff stolen from standard CBT, right? And the secret sauce, the bit that sort of personalizes it and makes it their own, this guru's own personal approach, that's usually just pseudoscience bullshit, yeah? And I know this because when I was sort of going through it at my worst, well, I didn't pay for these courses, but let's just say I managed to get my hands on a lot of them, and it's all bollocks. There's nothing you can find in any of these fancy online courses that you can't find in those books that I've just recommended to you, that you can buy secondhand on Amazon for like 99p each. So yeah, don't fall for it. Especially don't fall for these courses that say they're going to get rid of your anxiety in 7 days and stuff like that. It's just bollocks. Which actually brings me to my second point. And I don't mean to sound harsh, or maybe I do, but do the fucking work, right? I hear people say all the time with books and CBT, it didn't work. And I can't help but wonder, was it that didn't work, or was it you that didn't do the work? And the reason I say this is because most of these books, there's a protocol involved. They recommend that you sit down and do written exercises every day for, say, 6 to 8 weeks. And I've got people coming back to me saying, like, after a week, saying, oh, it didn't work. And it's like, no, you can't judge the utility of the book outside of the requirements laid out in it. It's like people who start dieting and then get all disheartened when they don't look like a fucking Instagram model at the end of week 1. You've got to stick with it. And I know it's hard, but just do it, and do it badly if you have to. If you can't manage an hour a day, do 10 minutes. But yeah, doing it badly consistently will serve you much better than doing it perfectly for 3 days and then just giving up. And finally, my final piece of advice when it comes to books is stop buying fucking books, right? Another habit people have is buying book after book after book after book in hopes that they're going to stumble across some like magical sentence or magical paragraph that's going to provide them with this big epiphany moment, this new way of thinking that's just going to sort of magically make all your troubles disappear. And take it from me, from someone who's wasted time reading about 100 bleeding books on depression and anxiety over the years, my advice is don't bother, yeah? Sure, there's little nuggets of wisdom and useful information that you're going to pick up along the way, which I suppose over time, yeah, it does add up to a pretty decent knowledge set. But again, it's just knowledge. And, in the absence of like practical application, knowledge is useless. So I think a much better use of your time, instead of just buying all these different books and hoping to discover the Holy Grail in one of them, is just pick 1 or 2 quality, well-renowned books and master them. Carry them around with you, read them over and over and over, do the exercises, highlight bits, make notes in the margins every day for like 6 months. Just dedicate your life to them like it's the frigging Bible. And then, honestly, feel free to drop me an email over the summer and then let me know how much your life has transformed. But don't fucking dare contact me in 2 weeks moaning that you started reading Mind Over Mood or whatever, but you had to stop because it didn't work. Right, enough book talk. If you could have unlimited funding to research anything you liked, however niche or bizarre, what would it be and why? Doesn't really apply to me, this question. I'm not a researcher or an academic or anything, but I'm going to have a crack at it anyway. So I'm quite interested by the whole nostalgia thing. A lot of people, I do it myself, always sort of pissing and moaning about the good old days and how like modern technology is sort of making everyone depressed, and it was better when we didn't have all this internet and stuff. And so if I had unlimited funding, I would love to build from scratch a bunch of sort of island civilizations, little mini civilizations that recreate down to the finest detail whatever decade people claim they most enjoyed. So for me, it was the 90s. I grew up in the 90s, like the golden era of hip-hop, Sony Mega Drive, 16-bit gaming, no mobile phones, 56k internet, Windows 95. What was it like? We had 3 music channels. We had MTV, VH1 and the box. Don't know if any of you remember the box, where you use your remote to sort of upvote and pick the music you wanted playing. But yeah, I'm very nostalgic. I'm always looking back to the 90s and stuff. So yeah, it'd be like a bunch of islands. So the 2000s, the 90s, the 80s, the 70s, the 60s, the 50s. And each one would have like a population of about, say, 10,000 people. So like a proper town. And it'd be completely cut off from the outside world. Yeah. But everything would be back the way it was. everything, like the road signs, the cars, the fashion, the same style carpets and wallpaper and furniture, everything down to like the finest details, and everyone would be subject to the same restrictions of the time as well. So like, you know, even though we did kind of have the internet in the 90s, it was very slow 56k dial-up internet. You know, we didn't have Facebook, so we would have the internet, but we wouldn't have access to like social networking. Everyone would be back using Ask Jeeves instead of Google, and I think I'd have it so that everyone had to live there for like maybe a year or two, and then after a year we'd sort of measure to see whether people's subjective levels of happiness have improved. I think that'd be a good experiment. Because I'm convinced that I'd be happier going back to the 90s. I'm very nostalgic. I think about it all the time. So yeah, I'd love to see if it really is just like rose tinted specs, or whether there's actually sort of whether there's really like a golden era of life that's environmental, that's sort of independent of the relationships that we had at the time. So yeah, that'd be my experiment. I think that'd be quite fun. Okay, if you could take this one. If you could take the reins of power at the Department of Health, what policy would you implement to improve the mental well-being of the general public? Fucking hell, here we go. So, I'm somebody who's gone from being like a full-on Stalinist communist in my youth to what would probably best be described nowadays as a libertarian conservative, I guess. This political climate we're living in at the moment, all the virtue signalling, the victimhood, the outrage culture, it's all something that I'm embarrassed to say that I'm sort of partly responsible for. Not in any sort of significant sense, of course. You know, I was hardly like a major player when I was involved in politics. But I played a small part in sort of propagating this regressive political agenda that's sort of taking over the fucking world at the moment. But what's been the most interesting observation or speculation to come out of that experience at a personal level has been to wonder how much of my mental health issues were due to a lack of resilience and resourcefulness that sort of came about as a direct result of my politics, which, you know, as a full-on communist, very much sort of eschewing personal responsibility, victim mentality, very blame-oriented, sort of married to the state, very emotionally charged, all just very sort of weak characteristics at the individual level. And I can't help suspect that it all sort of set me up for a fall, made me very susceptible to falling to pieces when, you know, sort of faced with adversity. And, you know, I mean, look at what's going on with like hard left politics now. Like, you've got colleges in America, like when Donald Trump was elected, students are being offered counselling. You know, we've got trigger warnings and safe spaces. These concepts like microaggressions, which is basically just offence seeking taken to like the forensic level. You know, like conservative speakers are being banned from speaking on college campuses in case anyone gets triggered or offended. Like, we're constantly telling women and black people and other ethnic minorities that no matter how hard they try to improve their lives, you know, you're not going to succeed because there's this mythological creature out there that's called institutional racism or institutional sexism, which is stopping you. And, you know, despite the fact that Barack Obama became president of the United States for 2 consecutive terms with a black first lady, people like Oprah Winfrey, worth $3 billion, richest African-American in the world. Not just richest African-American female, yeah, richest African-American, period. People like Mohammed Ibrahim, I think he's called, black guy, came from to the UK from the Sudan, got a master's degree and then a PhD, and then became like a self-made billionaire. What is it? It's like the 5 most powerful people in the UK, all women. The Queen, Prime Minister, Met Police Chief, Met Police Commissioner, whatever, Home Secretary, all women, yeah. But, you know, never let facts get in the way of a good narrative. Fucking hell, I remember, a bit of an aside this, but whatever. I remember going to a communist meeting in London years ago and staying with this guy whose house was an absolute shithole, right? Nothing wrong with the property, right? Or the area. It was a nice area. Building was fine. But his house was a fucking pigsty, right? And this guy's going off to communist meetings talking about how he's going to be like part of the vanguard party that brings about revolution and smashes capitalism and reorders the world in favour of the proletariat, you know, because he's sick of being oppressed. And it's like, motherfucker, you're not oppressed, right? You're tweeting your revolutionary slogans from an iPhone and wearing a pair of Nike Air Max, right? The latter being like a triple whammy of communist irony, because they're like £90 a pop for them trainers and manufactured in a sweatshop in communist China. And yeah, you live in a shithole because you're a lazy bastard. It costs bugger all to throw your shit in a bin bag, sweep the floor and, you know, run a duster over your telly. And the reason you've got no money is because you work shy, you don't want to work. The excuse being that you want to focus on revolutionary activity. That's what all the jobless communists used to say. And yeah, you spend your entire job seeker's allowance on buying expensive sneakers. And I remember thinking at the time, even though he was a comrade of mine, I remember thinking, you can't even make a sensible decision for yourself, but you think you're somehow qualified to know what's best for other people. Like, you can't even keep your living room clean, but you're somehow qualified to run the country. And let me tell you, I met loads of people like this in political activism on the radical left. But yeah, everyone seems to nowadays everyone's engaged in like the oppression Olympics, where like if you're a straight white male, well, you're so privileged you're apparently shitting gold, you know, and everything that you could ever need in life is handed to you on a silver platter, and nothing you achieve in life is due to hard work, but rather it's all down to white privilege. And if you're Christ knows, if you're a black, gay, female Muslim in a wheelchair, well, there's no point in you even trying to attempt to do anything with your life, because, you know, the world's so full of racist, sexist, bigot, homophobes that it's never gonna work out for you anyway. And it just seems like this is just like the message inherent in the cultural zeitgeist at the moment is, you're a special, fragile snowflake that needs protecting from anything that might possibly offend you. Life shit because Bill Gates has stolen all your money, and there's nothing you can do to improve your life because there's this like phantom puppet master out there who hates you and he's going to do everything in his power to stop you being happy. And I wouldn't mind, but the principles aren't even consistent. The rules are all over the fucking place. It's like fat is the new sexy. Yeah, but then fast food needs to be banned or regulated because they're making people overweight, and that's a bad thing. Body shaming is bad, unless you're skinny, in which case, you know, you're a bad influence and promoting anorexia. Like, porn's liberating, but glamour modeling's demeaning. Feminism's all about sort of women exercising their own personal choice, unless a woman wants to be a housewife, in which case she's throwing her life away and brainwashed by the patriarchy. Freedom of speech, so long as you don't say anything that might possibly offend someone. Criticism of anyone based on the gender, skin colour or sexual orientation is bigoted. Likewise, blaming, you know, an entire subsection of the population for the crimes of a few bad apples, that's unacceptable, unless you're a straight white male, in which case you deserve it because slavery. You know, we've got slut walks for women's sexual liberation, but if a man lets his gaze fall below the neck, he's a pervert. Gay rights, you know, which is all about like sexual equality and choosing who you want to be romantically involved with. But if you're straight and don't want to have sex with a trans person who's got the same genitals as you, that's transphobic. Holding the door open for a woman, that's demeaning. But then, you know, giving her a job based purely on a gender, fulfill a diversity quota, regardless of whether she's the most deserving candidate, that's perfectly fine. You're encouraged to be like entrepreneurial, but then if you actually succeed, you're the scum of the earth and a filthy capitalist. And it's just going mental. It's insane. And I've got to say, when like the biggest buffers against mental health issues are things like resiliency and self-efficacy and like having a sense of stability and certainty in your life, this fucking hopeless, helpless, angry victim culture that we're sort of raising our kids in at the moment, where the rules are just completely arbitrary, that cannot be good for like the future mental health prospects. And I just think, like, I look at my kids now and I just think we're just setting them up for a massive fall. And I'm not, don't get me wrong, right? I'm being a bit facetious. I'm not saying there aren't problems. There are plenty of problems when it comes to politics, right? But in terms of like the direct relationship between politics and mental health, I genuinely think the last thing we need is more nanny state interference in our lives, especially the sort that panders to this fucking insane regressive identity politics that's running rampant at the moment. So if I could implement a policy to improve the mental well-being of the general public, it would be to hand power and control and influence and responsibility back to the individual. And the only way to do that is less government, which I suppose might sound counterintuitive because, you know, I think politicians like to sort of pretend that they're like the buffer protecting like the little people from the evil corporations. But the philosopher John Dewey said, government is the shadow cast over society by big business. And what was it? The attenuation of the shadow will not change the substance. And, you know, since like government derives its power from people, you know, when politicians pimp themselves out to corporations for like campaign money and backhanders, that's your power that they're selling. And the more power we hand to the government, the more power they can sort of siphon off to the corporations, and, you know, the less control we have over our own lives. So, fuck them. Sorry, went on a bit of a rant there. Right, next question. What, if anything, keeps you up at night? Okay. I worry about dying before my children grow up. Now, this is probably going to sound like really sort of lame and saccharine to people who haven't got kids. But I want to see my kids graduate, you know, and like pass the driving tests and buy the first car and get married and have kids and, you know, I want to be a granddad and all that kind of thing. And to miss out on those things scares the fucking life out of me. And, you know, I talk a lot about wanting to sort of achieve something with my life. You know, what I feel like my existence sort of mattered to some degree. But if I had to choose between feeling that sense of personal achievement and like watching my kids pass all those sort of mundane milestones, and I couldn't have both, I had to choose, I would choose complete insignificance, even if it meant having to sort of carry around a real sense of personal insignificance. I would choose that and watching my kids graduate over significance and not seeing my kids graduate every single time. I think what haunts me more than what I may or may not miss out on, though, is whether or not my kids would remember me. That's the most important thing to me. It's funny because I had when Roman was first born, I had this fear like really intensely. But then as he's sort of grown up, he's nearly 7 now. The fear sort of started to subside a bit because, you know, the older he got, the more likely he was to remember me if anything happened to me. But now that Hope's been born, like she's only 11 months old, that fear's sort of returned with a vengeance, and I'm sort of back thinking about like death and mortality all the time again. And yeah, I've got to say, I think another reason it sort of scares me is I don't have any sort of romantic notions about that situation. Like, you know, if anything happened to me now, you know, Leanne's 29, she would eventually move on, and the kids are young enough that it'd probably happen within a time frame where they'd end up like getting a stepdad. And for me, it just feels like my kids being raised by someone else is a lose-lose situation. Like if Leanne got with some dickhead who treated him terrible, that'd be fucking awful. But then on the flip side, if she found like a really nice guy who was really good, which, you know, would be preferable, it's like I'd be replaced and forgotten about. And I don't know, it just feels like it'd just make my sort of entire existence a fucking waste of time. And yeah, that one genuinely keeps me up at night, scares the shit out of me. Okay, what mistakes do you continue to make despite knowing better? I think complacency would be the answer for this one. Falling into the comfort zone, especially when it comes to my health. So what I mean by that is, like, mine and many other people's sort of natural level psychologically, my natural level is sort of dread and pessimism. Like left unattended, that's what I sort of naturally revert to. So I sort of need to constantly be working to sort of work my way out of negativity, or anxiety or indifference or laziness or like whatever it is. And so let's say I'm feeling depressed as an example, right? And it's getting pretty bad. What'll happen is I'll get to a point where it's so bad that I'm sort of forced into taking action. It's like I've got to do something about this now because things are getting too dark or whatever. So I'll do things like I'll sort my diet out, I'll stop eating shit, start meditating and exercising and all that sort of bollocks. And I'm consistent with it as well. I'll do it for like a couple of months and I'll start feeling better. But then I get in the comfort zone because I've started feeling better. I sort of take my foot off the accelerator because I'm feeling a bit better now, and so I can have a treat. I don't have to be so strict with my diet. I can go to McDonald's and maybe I can skip meditation today. But then I just sort of get lazier and lazier and more lax, and then slowly but surely I sort of slip back into old habits, and then before I know it I'm right back where I started again, feeling like shit and having to start all over again. And same thing happens with like exercise. I'll get fat, start feeling disgusting, so I start dieting, doing a bit of exercise, and then the mirror, my reflection starts looking a bit more forgiving. I start to feel like less sorry for Leanne, who has to have sex with me, and then again I take my foot off the accelerator, and before I know it I'm all podgy and hanging again. But what I should be doing in both cases is just keeping going. Like, fuck the comfort zone. Like, you should keep going until you get into the, what would it be, like the optimal zone, I guess, where you're sort of feeling as healthy as it's possible to feel and as good as it's possible to look as well, I suppose. And that's a shit thing. I've gotten good at pulling myself out of a hole. That's why, I don't fear things like depression and anxiety anymore, because I know, like, reliably I can pull myself out of it. But it's because of that reliability of it that I let myself fall back into it. So I think sort of the next stage for me is to sort of mastery, if that makes sense, to start sort of aiming for as good as possible instead of just good enough. There's a brilliant quote by Socrates, and it's no man has the right to be an amateur in the matter of physical training. It's a shame for a man to grow old without seeing the beauty and strength of which his body is capable. And I love that quote, and I think that's a truism beyond just the physical. I think that's a good philosophy for the mind as well. Okay, what part of your career are you most proud of? Well, I've already kind of answered this question. I mean, I did back in episode 32. I spoke about when I was like 23. I'll give you the quick version. I was 23. I built a nightclub, and I didn't have very much money to do like the refurbishment and stuff. So I basically did it all myself, and I did a really good job of it. And I'd never done anything like that before. I was learning from scratch, learning as I was going, and I did a really good job of it. So that is my proudest sort of career moment. But since I've already answered that one before, I'm going to try and come up with something else. So I don't know. The truth is I haven't really had like any sort of career to speak of, really. I'm one of those that's just sort of flitted from job to job, and I've had lots of interesting jobs. I've worked as a doorman in a brothel. I've been a driver and a chaperone for escort agencies. I've been a radio presenter. I used to run a social network for naturists. But I'm not really, they're quirky and they were fun at the time, but I'm not really sort of proud of any of those things. I think I don't know, just off the top of my head now, I'm thinking that I'm quite proud of this that I'm doing now. No, that's not quite true. I'm proud of sticking with this. I'm proud of myself that I've stuck with this project. I've been doing this for like a year and a half now, and it's been a bit of a pain in the ass sometimes, to be honest. And there's been so many times that I've wanted to quit, especially this past month with all the YouTube bullshit. Like, sometimes I just feel like I'm just sort of taking one step forward and two steps back. And I've always been sort of very impulsive when it comes to quitting. Like with jobs in the past, I'm very much one of those people that'll just I see my ass one day at work and I just quit on the spot and and sort of don't worry about the consequences of it. And I've done that again with like a couple of my own projects in the past where I've just sort of deleted it on a whim, like in the heat of the moment, to sort of like prevent me from changing my mind later on. And I've done that a few times with this, where I've been sort of hovering my finger over the delete button, sort of metaphorically. But then, like, I don't know, a cooler head has prevailed. So, I mean, I am proud of what I'm doing with this. But if I'm being completely honest, I'm just more proud that I've stuck with it despite how difficult it's been sometimes, I guess. So, okay, outside of family and academia, well, I'm not involved in academia, so outside of family and work life, what investment of time or money has brought you the most joy or fulfillment? Oh, that's an easy one. Reading. So, like, all the way through like school, high school, like right up to being, I don't know, maybe like 20 years old, I was a fucking terrible reader. Like, I could read, I could decipher words, but my comprehension was shocking. I remember us reading The Hobbit by Tolkien in English class in high school, and it wasn't sinking in. It was like I could read a paragraph, and it was, sort of in one ear and out the other. Nothing was sticking. And I've read that, honestly, I have read The Hobbit from cover to cover, and I don't know a single thing. I could not quote you a single line, a character, a plot. I don't know what happens in The Hobbit. I haven't got a clue. And yeah, I remember when I left school, I still wasn't too great with reading and stuff. Like, my first job was in a factory, in a lampshade factory. And then I had some jobs in factories after that. And when we used to sort of like sit around the dinner table in these factories, like the older guys who were all sort of like guys that were involved in unions and stuff like that, they were all involved in politics and they read the papers and stuff like that. And they'd all sit around sort of having political discussions and like history and all sorts of things had come up. And they'd sort of get everyone involved. And I'm like 16, 17, 18 at the time or whatever. And they'd try and bring me in on it. And I didn't have a fucking clue what they were talking about most of the time. I just completely lost. And it made me sort of feel a bit stupid. And so I felt, that was when I felt the effects of sort of not like concentrating in school and stuff and not really taking my education seriously. So I kind of figured that I was going to have to sort of educate myself like from scratch now as an adult. And so I remember just going to the library one day and was going to pick like a random book, and one was like I can't remember the name of it now, but it was a history of like Great Britain or whatever. I thought that might be a good place to start because it would give me loads of ideas for where I could take my reading next or whatever. I stumbled across there's only like a brief paragraph in there about this slave trade, and I'd never heard of the slave trade before. So as sort of stupid and naive as it sounds now, when I was younger, I just thought like I thought black people lived in America because, I don't know, that people had just moved there generations ago or whatever, and it was just all part of like immigration and stuff, and that's what made America great. I didn't have a clue about the slave trade, and I was just shocked by it. And so I went back and I got another book that was called, I think it was just called The Slave Trade, the history of the Atlantic slave trade or something, by a guy called Hugh Thomas. And it's this big, huge book with about 800 pages. And again, bearing in mind, I've not really read much stuff before. And I like battered my way through that book in about 2 weeks in like 800 pages because I was just fascinated by it. And it was just, I don't know, I sort of rediscovered reading. It was, all these like parts of the world that have been hidden from me before and that I didn't know about. I was discovering the world again, and I was doing it through reading, and it was sort of exciting to finally be able to read a book and remember things from it and to become engrossed in it. And I just went crazy from there, just reading like everything I could get my hands on. And like I say, so learned to love reading, and I don't take it for granted in that way. I think a lot of people take reading for granted. They learn to do it early on, and it's just something you do, like walking and talking. But that wasn't the experience for me. And so, yeah, and now I'm really good at it. And it's the one thing that, besides sort of like providing me with an education, it's my sort of most reliable form of escape. even more so than things like movies or I mean, I don't quite know how to describe this. So, oh right, one of my mum's neighbour is a guy that was in the army, and he struggles with like PTSD. And I remember him telling me one day that there's something about door frames that sets him off, apparently. And he has this thing where he'll be walking through a door, and all of a sudden, like say he's going into his bathroom, he'll walk through the door and the bathroom sort of disappears, and instead, in place of the bathroom, he'll see like the rolling sort of deserts of Iraq and places like that where he was fighting in the army, and he sees people running around and gunshots, and he can hear things and he can smell things, and it's for those few seconds or few minutes, because he says he sort of loses time and he doesn't know how long it lasts. But however long it lasts, he's back there. And we've talked about this in the episode about PTSD, how PTSD, the flashbacks are very much about reliving the experience. And he talks about how it's vivid enough that he's there again. And that's sort of the best way that I can describe what happens to me when I'm reading. Obviously, it's not in a traumatic sense, but it's just that it's so vivid when I'm reading, when I'm engrossed in things, especially with things like fiction. It's like stepping into a hologram. You know, the scenes that I'm reading become clear as day. I can smell it, I can feel it. It's like I'm there with the characters, and I know part of me wishes sometimes when I'm reading that, because I get so lost in it, you know, like I just sort of wish that my consciousness would just sort of fold inside out and then just sort of suck me in over the void, so that I'd find myself on the other side of the mirror like Alice through the looking glass. And I don't know, it's the only time I'm not thinking. I don't know, I'm in sort of the purest mode of observation when I'm reading, and I just love it. And well, I'm here, actually. I'm gonna have to. I've been thinking about this, just as I was saying it to you. I've got to give you a book recommendation, a fiction book recommendation. If you want to read something that's like truly out of this world to read, try a book called Blood Meridian, by Cormac McCarthy. I don't know, or just read anything by Cormac McCarthy. I don't know how to recommend him, other than to say he's the sort of wordsmith that makes Shakespeare sound like a second-rate pulp novelist in comparison. And yeah, speaking of like my comprehension and stuff, and just as a way of boasting now, and to sort of sell you on the on Cormac McCarthy, I've got so many passages memorized from his books, and I'm just going to sort of throw a couple out there now that have just reminded me. These are scenes that I remember, that they're perfect examples of scenes that when I'm reading them, I just get sucked in and find myself there. One is, these are both from Blood Meridian. One is the jagged mountains were pure blue in the dawn, and everywhere birds twittered, and the sun when it rose caught the moon in the west, so that they lay opposed to each other across the earth, the sun white hot and the moon a pale replica, as if they were the ends of a common bow beyond whose terminals burned worlds past all reckoning. And another one is, where hunters and woodcutters once slept in their boots by the dying of the light of their thousand fires, and went on, old Teutonic forebears with eyes incandesced by the visionary light of a massive rapacity, wave on wave of the violent and the insane, their brains stoked with sporeless analogues of all that was, lean Aryans with their abrogate Semitic chapbooks reenacting the dramas and parables therein, and mindless and pale with a longing that nothing save the dark's total restitution could appease. That is from memory, and it's fucking brilliant. Brilliant to read, and yeah, brilliant to be able to do that, considering I can't remember a fucking single line of The Hobbit. Actually, there's a famous literary critic called Howard Bloom. He's like the godfather of literary theory, and so it's basically, you know, it's his job to read books and analyze books. And yeah, he said it took him something like 3 attempts to finally get through Blood Meridian, just because he found it such like an emotionally draining experience. And yeah, I can certainly appreciate that sentiment. It's certainly a unique experience. So yeah, that's another book recommendation for you there. Okay, what do you think is the key to happiness? Telling the truth is the key to happiness. Okay, so the reason we tell lies is because we're trying to sort of manufacture an outcome. You know, we're trying to shape the world as it sort of currently presents itself into the world we want it to be, or people as well. Like, we're trying to shape people as they present themselves into the type of person we want them to be. You know, or we're trying to make ourselves appear a certain way so that people will approve of us. And that's it's hard work. It's a manipulation exercise. And I think at best when we do that, all we can sort of hope to create through lying is a world that's sort of like a cheap imitation of the world that we'd like to inhabit, but it's like it'll never actually be the world we'd like to inhabit, if that makes sense. Like, it won't be genuine, and it's fragile as well. Like, it won't take much to make it come apart at the seams. And I think, like, telling the truth forces you to sort of present yourself to the world, and for the world to, like, present itself to you in a way that's most conducive to happiness. So this is why, like, I don't know, take for a common example is like when gay people find coming out of the closet so liberating. You know, so say you've got a gay guy, he's pretending to be straight, you know, and as long as he keeps up the charade, the world around him is going to bombard him with opportunities based on the way he presents himself to the world, and not based on what he actually wants. You know, so he's being approached by women. You know, maybe he's in a relationship with a woman. You know, his social circle might consist of people who maybe don't approve of his sexuality. You know, if he's engaged in a relationship with another guy, he's probably being, like, clandestine about it, so he's worried about getting caught because maybe it'll ruin his reputation. You know, and maybe the guy that he's seeing probably, you know, doesn't appreciate being hidden away like a dirty little secret, and that's creating, you know, resentment maybe, which poses a risk of its own. But, like, the moment he comes clean and he's open about it, the world around him changes. It's not just a feeling. It's not just feeling good to be sort of out of the closet. The world will approach him differently. You know, suddenly he's not being approached by, you know, women anymore, which is probably useless to him. You know, and he's, you know, all of a sudden he's sort of free to be approached by other guys in public, or to hang out in places where he can meet the people he wants to. And, you know, those friends that maybe don't approve of homosexuality or whatever, well, now they've got no choice but to sort of fall by the wayside. And, you know, that's a good thing, because it makes room for people who do approve. And, you know, maybe his family accept him, maybe they don't, but it's like, you know, surely it's better to be ostracized for what you are than to be loved for what you're not, because at least you can take ownership of it. You know, if somebody loves you for something you're not, they don't actually love you, do they? They love, you know, you don't own that love. It's not yours. And I think that the same applies to every aspect of life. You know, whether it's your romantic relationships, your friendships, your job, your career, ambitions, whatever. I think another benefit of telling the truth is, if you choose to be, like, principled about telling the truth, you know, that you're going to tell the truth no matter what, it forces you to be more careful about the decisions you make in life. You know, so, you know, imagine you're in a long-term relationship and you're living together, you've got kids, a car, pets, like, you've got a whole life together, and you're happy as well. It's not like you're in an unhappy situation. Then, you know, let's imagine that I don't know, say you meet someone at work who's, like, offering you the perfect opportunity to have an affair. You know, they only want to meet for something very casually, like the occasional meet up, no romance, they just want sex or whatever. And it's super tempting, you know, and the chances of you getting caught are minuscule, but, you know, there's still a chance. And if you do get caught, you're going to lose everything. If you're the sort of person that permits yourself to lie, the answer to that quandary might be to just sort of up the ante on the lies, to be more committed to the lie, you know, to be more sort of sophisticated about it, to reduce the risk of getting caught. And then you're not just being tempted by the person tempting you, you're tempting yourself as well. But, you know, if you're sort of committed to telling the truth, you inoculate yourself from the risk of that, you know, and not just because you're willing to snitch yourself in if you do give in to temptation, but it's likely that you'll sort of diffuse the situation before it even escalates. Because, you know, like that, the first time that person bats their eyelids at you at the water cooler, when you go home in the evening and your partner says, you know, anything interesting happened at work today, you say, yeah, I think, you know, the girl at the office was flirting with me, and then, you know, being honest like that, it's already sort of out in the open. Or, you know, as well, if you do find yourself sort of tempted by this new opportunity and you're not happy in your relationship, that's something that needs to be dealt with as well. And I don't know, the best possible outcome is only going to present itself if you be open and honest about it and sort of tackle it head on. The other thing about lying is it's just hard work. Like, the way I see it is, whenever you tell a lie, it's like throwing a little rock in a bag of bullshit that you've got to carry around with you. And it's like, the more lies you tell, the heavier it gets, because like the more lies you tell, the more potential lies you have to tell to maintain it, if that makes sense. Because, you know, every time you lie, you sort of create an alternative universe with its own history that's sort of required to arrive at the fictional point in time that you've created. So, okay, let's say you lie in your CV, you know, about going to university or something like that. What the fuck are you going to do if that piques the interest of the person at the job interview, and then they start asking you loads of questions about it? Because, you know, to say you went to university when you didn't, you're not just claiming the results of going to uni, you're claiming the experience of it as well. But, you know, like, implicit in the claim that you went to university is the idea that you had certain classes, certain experiences, that you met particular people, you had particular teachers that taught you particular things. And, you know, depending on the curiosity of the person you've lied to, you might be called upon to sort of answer any number of questions about those fictional experiences. And what's worse, like, you know, imagine you get the job and then your boss starts telling everyone in the office about all these imaginary, amazing experiences that you've had. So now you've got to sort of recount what you told him to all these new people. But, you know, you better not fucking get any of the details wrong, because you might expose yourself. And, yeah, I suppose that's the other thing about lying. It's like, you have to consciously remember things. It's like, sort of like spinning plates, I guess. Whereas, I don't know, the truth just sort of sticks all by itself. Like, you remember the truth automatically. Like, the truth doesn't weigh anything, might be the best way to think about it. Whereas, yeah, lies is heavy. It's like a heavy burden to bear. But a couple of like points of distinction I think are sort of worth mentioning. When you commit to telling the truth doesn't mean like answering every question that someone puts to you. Like, you're not playing truth or dare. You know, you can just, if someone asks you a question, you can say, I'm not telling you that. I don't feel comfortable telling you that. It doesn't mean you have to avoid generalities as well. You know, you can be honest with people without like going into the nitty gritty details. And I don't think you have to sacrifice tact either. Like, the common example of sort of telling your girlfriend that she looks fat in a dress or whatever. You don't have to say like, oh fucking Jesus, you look like a fucking pig in a miniskirt. You can just say, I don't think it suits you. You know, I like that other black dress that you've got. You know, and it's honest. It sort of brings about the same outcome, but nobody's feelings get hurt. And I don't know, if like the moral stance isn't doing it for you, you need something a bit more Machiavellian to sell you on the idea. Just think about it like this. Telling the truth's more likely to get you what you want in the end. Like Madonna said, a lot of people are afraid to say what they want. That's why they don't get what they want. So, yeah, what's the key to happiness? Telling the truth. Okay, last but by no means least, what's the best piece of life advice anyone's ever given you? Okay, so regular listeners might have noticed that I usually make the last question, if that makes sense. I usually make what's the key to happiness my final question. But on this occasion, I've got an answer for this question, which I think is probably more impactful. And it kind of ties in with the last question as well. So I thought I'd save this one to last. And before I give you the quote itself, let me sort of give you the philosophy behind it. And the philosophy behind this quote is being cognizant of your mortality, like knowing that you're going to die. And I don't just mean sort of just like, knowing that I'm going to die. I mean, a bit like being truly convinced of it. I think a lot of people think death is something that like happens to other people, or that it's at best it's going to happen to like a future you, like you're not going to be there for it. And it's like, I'm afraid not. It's death is going to happen to you. Like this you that's listening to me right now and experiencing this sense of nowness, yeah, you're the one that's going to die, not the future you, yeah? And you aren't just going to be there when it happens. You're going to be in it, engulfed in it. Like when you die, like right now, it feels like something that's going to happen then. But when that then finally gets here, it's going to be happening now. And you're going to be there for it. Yeah? And it's a difficult concept to try and get people to internalize, I think. It's Tim Pitchell, I interviewed, I think it was episode 9 or 11 or something like that, on the topic of procrastination. One concept he taught me was this idea of there being a difference between knowing and realizing. And I think the example he uses is that, like, we know we should exercise and like eat healthy to keep our hearts healthy and stuff like that. But we don't realise it until we have a heart attack. It's only after we've had a heart attack that we realise something, that we get serious about it. And I think if you haven't had like a near-death experience and maybe stared your mortality in the face, the only way to get anywhere close to internalising our finiteness is through like persistent contemplation of it, I guess. I think it's just because we're all naturally have a very sort of solipsistic view of the world, because, you know, everything that is, we can only experience it from like an observational perspective. Like it's almost like everything that exists is somehow dependent on our ability to perceive it. You know, so like the idea of ourselves not existing, it just doesn't compute, because it's like when we die, it's not just that we disappear, but everything that matters or everything that exists in the world disappears into oblivion as well. Because, like, yeah, we leave other people behind who carry on perceiving the world, but it's almost like, I don't know, without us perceiving them being able to perceive it, it's like when we die, the universe dies with us. I don't know if that makes sense. Anyway, I think, yeah, once you're sort of able to appreciate properly that death is coming for you in the same way it's coming for everybody else, like that you're not exempt from it, you've sort of got two choices. And, you know, you can either freak out about the pointlessness of it all, which isn't going to get you anywhere. You know, freaking out ain't going to stop it or slow it down. It's happening, it's coming. Or you can use a sort of like your conscious awareness of death as leverage to sort of squeeze the most out of the opportunity you've been given. And this is an opportunity. Like, make no mistake about it, there's probably more potential people skeeted up the wall or flushed down the toilet in condoms every day than actual people that ever existed ever. So I think sort of, yeah, being consciously aware of death gives you, it gives you leverage in the present moment. Like, it gives you leverage to take chances, you know, to do something now that you might otherwise put off, you know, to tell someone you love them when you might otherwise feel embarrassed, to stop wasting time, or to just do something a bit wild and crazy. But it doesn't necessarily facilitate irresponsibility, you know, because, you know, knowing you're going to die doesn't prevent you from having to, like, live with the consequences of your choices in the meantime. So anyway, rambling on a bit here, but yeah, I've thrown a million quotes at you this episode, but yeah, let me leave you with this one, because this is the direct answer to this question. What's the best piece of life advice anyone's ever given you? I don't know who said this. I read it somewhere. I can't remember where. I've not been able to track it down to a particular person, but it's the most haunting quote I've ever heard, and it's the one I remind myself of when I need a bit of a kick up the arse to take action or to do the right thing. And that quote is, "In your final moments on earth, the person you became will meet the person you could have become." Right, let that sink in a moment. It's fucking awful. In your final moments on earth, the person you became will meet the person you could have become. It's awful and scary and super inspiring, I think. Like I say, it fucking haunts me, that quote, and I love it because it forces me to take action, and it forces me to appreciate life and being alive, and yeah, and all that bollocks. So yeah, that's pretty much it, this episode. And one final time, if you enjoyed this episode, you want to hear more of these Ask Me Anything episodes, all you need to do is go to myownworstenemy.org patreon.com/support and subscribe for as little as £2 a month. And yeah, that's about it. So, like they used to say on Crime Watchers back in the day, don't have nightmares, do sleep well, and I'll see you again next time. Peace out.